quilty friends. I am Laura, and you have found LalaDee's Quilting Bee. I am probably going to be stumbling over my words for a couple of minutes because I have done some floss tube videos. I think we're around 10 or something right now. So I'm still pretty new to the floss tube, but I've kind of found a rhythm with it, and but I'm also a quilter, and I wanted to be able to share that in a place that those who aren't necessarily interested in it aren't forced to consume this information. Anyways, so welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm glad you found me, and hopefully as we do this a little bit more, the rhythm will be found for these videos as well. And one second, my little dog here is rattling away. I'm going to take her collar off. Oh, you're free now. Yay. She thinks it's very exciting. I'm excited too. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to share my quilting. I have been quilting for a long time. So a little bit, very briefly, about my background. I grew up with my grandmother and my mother both being seamstresses, and when quilting, I don't know how long my grandma had quilted. A long time. Long enough that I have the beginnings of one of my great-grandma's old projects. So I think it had always kind of been in the family in some way. But certainly within the three of us, there was a renewed enthusiasm for it, 80s, 90s, and onward. And so my grandma, I always knew her as a quilter. My mom was always a quilter. She does beautiful, beautiful things. And they began introducing me to all things stitchy when I was tiny. There was a little embroidered lamb that sat on my grandma's wall for ever that I did when I don't know how old I was, 6 maybe. And so I've just kind of always been into it. I would say that I really started learning quilting when I was around 7, maybe 8, and I gained my own personal enthusiasm for it in my teens. And then it kind of just took off from there, as my first job was in a quilt shop, and I continued to work in quilt shops for the subsequent 19 years. And what wonderful experiences those were. Both of the shops I worked in were absolutely wonderful. And an education as well, because even when you're a quilter, being on the retail side of it is vastly different, and I have taught everything from beginning quilting to wool applique and a couple specialty classes, and teaching it makes you think about it differently, because you don't just do it. Once you learn something, you kind of just go through the motions and you do it, and you know how to puzzle things out when you reach stumbling points. And so to then teach it to somebody and have them reach a stumbling point and have to kind of explain the process makes you think about the process in a very different way. And so I'm really grateful for all the experience I've had, in my life, to just be able to see it from different perspectives. So hopefully, as we go on, this first video, we're going to do a trunk show. I've got a stack here of what work I have. Let's see, I wrote it down and then threw it away. I think I have 17 quilts and around 10 mini quilts, because I like to do mini quilts too, and to share with you. And so those are completed, fully finished, used projects. They are not going to be in beautiful, pristine shape, because most of them have been being used for over a decade. I don't have a lot of current projects. I think I've only finished, I want to say 4 of them in the last 5 years, because I went through a phase where my family, all my cousins and siblings were having babies, and so I was making a lot of baby quilts and giving a lot of my projects away, which is lovely. It's how we keep getting to do what we do, right? We can't keep it all. We can only store so much. But it's left me with a lot of really tired quilts and then a lot of unfinished things that I would love to be in my home someday. So I'm kind of taking, with the exception of 2 or 3 secret projects I have going, I am kind of taking this time to complete some projects for our home, which is really, really lovely. It's exciting to think, oh yeah, this project I'll see it in the future. It won't just disappear into the nether. Anyway, so we'll do our trunk show, and then I'll show you 3 or 4 projects that I have going on, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. I always, if you've watched my floss tubes, you know that I am not monogamous in my projects, and that bleeds into my quilting as well. I kind of work on what I'm inspired on, and unlike my cross stitch, I'm not necessarily as seasonal. Some things I am, like if I'm doing a Crabapple Hill embroidery project, I'll probably restrain my working on that into a season. Restrain, I'm not sure that was the right word, but anyway. But if I'm just doing a quilting project, it's kind of if I'm in the mood for it, when I have the enthusiasm for it. And so I'm a little bit more flexible with the seasonal projects in my quilting than I am with my cross stitch. So that'll be kind of fun. It'll just kind of change as we go. Yeah. Okay. So let's jump into my finished things. I've kind of stacked them in order of like oldest to newest, and then I have dug around my sewing room as much as I can to find all of the pattern information for you. I don't have information on everything, unfortunately. Some things were old and from magazines, or they were borrowed patterns that have gone back to their people, and we'll kind of talk about that as they come up. But yeah, so I'm going to shift the camera here because I have to stand up. You can't show a quilt sitting down, most of them. So we'll get our ups and downs going here. I'm going to shift it over just a little bit. Okay, beautiful. First, I'm going to start with these 2 pillows, which I'm only going to start with because, let's tilt up a little bit more, because I get a lot of questions in some of my videos. I have a rotation of little throw pillows that I've made, or quilts that sit on this chair behind me, and so I will get questions, it's natural. Oh, what's that? And anyway, so let's answer a couple of those. The first one is this cute little outpill, which I love. I think I made this around 8 years ago or so, and it is a Sue Spargo. It's one of her earlier ones, Miss Hoot pillow, and it's a combination of wool applique and needle turn cotton applique, but it's on this gorgeous hand-dyed wool, and it's one of my favorites. I really, really love it. Anyway, so that is called Miss Hoot Pillow by Sue Spargo. And it says copyright is in 2009, so I would imagine if you're gonna find it, your best shot is probably on her website. That'd be my guess. So there's that one. And then this next one is, I need to redo these because I did these at a time when I didn't have a lot of resources and was working from scraps. And so how I did this, it's just an envelope pillow finish, and it drives me crazy because my pillow form doesn't quite fit it, and it's sloppy looking, so I need to redo them, and I would prefer a zipper back on it, I think. Then I could put a more full pillow without it bulging or opening up. Anyway, this is the Hexie pillow by Modern Handcraft, and I believe I bought this pattern on Etsy. So that's where I would look for it. Or just Google Hexi Pillow by Modern Handcraft. Maybe a shop has it somewhere. It's not an old pattern though. I've done this within the last 7 years. So it should be out there. It's really cute and it's cool. It's not actually brain. It's not actually applique on. They are English paper piece. You use English paper pieces to create the hexagon, and then you pull the papers and you glue it down with a permanent glue and let that dry, and then you quilt over it. So everything's really contained, and you can see even with, 7-8 years, it's still in really good shape. So this one was really fun to do. I actually have dreams of rearranging them and maybe making like a rainbow, or like you could do a seasonal heart, or it's really only limited by your imagination. I would also love, I think even just the same layout but in autumn colors would be really pretty, because I do like to display things seasonally. All right, I'll set this over here. Okay, this is my oldest project. It has no pattern. It's not pretty. But it's the oldest one I have that I made. I'm pretty sure I did it when I was around 7. It's just this little bunny with this old fabric. It's cute. But I look at it and it's like, oh yeah, I was learning. We all learn. And that's why I wanted to show it, because we all start somewhere, right? Some of the things you'll see in here are okay, and some of them are really pretty. Not to toot my own horn, but but I have closing in on 30 years of experience at this point with quilting, and so I didn't start out being able to just pick up a pattern and tweak it to the way I want it to be and just kind of customize anything I see. That is a skill and it's learnable, and so my stitches, part of that is just age, part of it is just I didn't know what I was doing. I was learning. Anyways, so I wanted to make a point of that we're all learning. Even I'm learning. Even with my almost 30 years of experience, like there are still things I don't know, and there are people that have focused on areas that I've only dabbled in, and the learning never ends, right? Okay, I need to figure out where I'm going to put these. All right, we'll just set it here, because otherwise this video will be very, very long. Okay, this next one is a table runner, and I actually quite love this one. I pull it out in the late summer and it stays out pretty much up until Christmas, just because the colors are so rich and beautiful. This was done with a jelly roll, but it's one of those tiny ones. It doesn't have to be. This one was done with one of the 1-inch jelly rolls, and then I think we supplemented a couple different fabrics in. I made this one as a sample years ago, and this is the back. Backs are fun on quilts. Not all of my backs are pretty, but I've tried in more recent years to make more of an effort. I worked with a gal who said the backs are just as important as the front. They should make you happy, and so I loved that and have tried to do that. Anyways, it's really fun to make. It's not as complicated as it looks, but probably intermediate. If you had somebody who knew what they were doing right with you, you could do it as a beginner, because like I said, it's not complicated. You'd want someone who was familiar with it. Anyways, this is Aardvark quilts. Aardvark quilts, holiday herringbone, and again, you could use colors that fit your room, or it's long enough to drape over a piano, or piano benches where I like to put it a lot of the time. And so you could really pick colors that, fit your room. It's fun. Okay, this one is a free chart, I believe, or it was not very expensive. I know I downloaded it. Peppermint. Okay, anyways. It's the, see, I'm still learning. I'm not sure how to do these. It's the peppermint candy table runner. And it's produced by somebody. That Patchwork place. So I must have downloaded this one off of a website. It looks like it was originally in a book called Deck the Halls Quilts to Celebrate Christmas. And it was designed by Cheryl Taylor. But I got it off of shopmartingale.com. Anyway, this was the original colorway, and it's super cute as peppermint, but we had gotten this really sweet Lacian line in, and so I wanted to do it in spring colors. So I did. One thing to note about my projects is that, this one just had a backing that I had in my stash, and the palette worked, so it's kind of cool. I've never really loved it, but now that I look at it, it's pretty cool. Anyway, something to note about my projects is that I quilt all my own stuff. I don't pay for long arming, so please be gentle. Because I do my best, but it's one of those skills that I am working on. I'm improving, and each time I do it, I get a little bit better. But not all of my projects have gorgeous quilting. Oh my goodness, some of those long arm quilts are, the quilting alone is artwork. It's a masterpiece. It's really awesome. This one, let me see if I can back up a little bit. Ooh, this one makes me happy. And I can never decide whether to hang it on a wall, or it usually, again, will go on like a piano bench or a table or something like that. It was fun to do. I mean, when I started quilting, I was very traditional, and it was 1800s or bust. And I just loved traditional designs and traditional colors, and there's an elegance to them that you really, and a timelessness really, that is so appealing. And my mom and grandma were really into the batiks at the time. I was 17 and working in a quilt shop, and I was like, I will never buy batiks. Oh, little girl, never say never. Because now I have buckets of batiks, and I adore them, and I love them subtle or in your face, and they are just so beautiful. The saturation of color is really hard to beat. I love them. Anyways, this is Quilting Time, designs by Vicki Stratton, pineapples. My mom bought this for me when she was in Hawaii. They went a couple of times, and so there's a quilt, and then there's also a table runner. It's two separate patterns, by the way. Don't be upset if you buy one and you're like, where's the runner? And it's just the quilt. Someday I want to make the quilt as well, but you'll see in my stack that I made a different pineapple quilt. So I have several pineapple things that come out during the summer because they're happy. Okay, next one. And this one I'll just fold in half, and because it's the same in every block. Well, here, we'll do the whole thing for a second. Another runner. I had a puppy. The danger of putting a runner on your coffee table, and this is wool felt, is that they think it looks really great to chew on. Anyways, but this is a really sweet one. It was fun to do, and I don't normally like wool felt. I do a lot of wool applique, but wool felt doesn't have, it's not a woven fiber, it's a pressed fiber, so it doesn't have the longevity of a felted wool. And we'll have an episode where we talk about wool applique and stuff like that, because it's one of my passions. But anyways, But this actually, it worked really well for this because it's supposed to be, you know, that lacy paper doily stuff that goes around Valentine things. Anyways, it's worked really well for that. It has the structure to hold that kind of crisp look, especially with the punched holes. That would be more difficult to achieve with felted wool, clean holes. Anyways, it's a Shabby Fabrics patchwork Valentine table runner, and they have a whole 12-month series of these that are really, really cute. Everything from leaves to birds to, I think, ice skates is the January one. Anyways, love this one. This one was also a sample for one of the stores I worked in, and they had a fun program where if you made a sample, they got to keep it pretty much how long they wanted, but when they were done with it, it was yours. So that was always fun. This one I could not find the pattern for. It was another one of those samples, but I don't even remember what it was called. This one is hand-dyed wool on woven cottons, and oh my goodness, it's one of my all-time favorite finishes. It's just, I just love it. I love the dimension that you get, that the wool achieved in the flower bin pail bucket thing. Anyways, and just the textures of the wovens. This is one of my favorites. It's up almost year round for me because I love it. And this is a little pin that my grandma, my mother and I are very similar. And when I was growing up, we butt heads a lot. Like we just, we're both equally stubborn. And so if we got set on something, it was difficult to communicate effectively between us because of our similarities and our stubbornness. And so while my mother is a fountain of knowledge that I now use as much as I can, when I was a teenager, it was really difficult for her to teach me how to quilt because we just had a hard time communicating, and I know it must have been maddening for her. Mom, if you're watching, I'm sorry, truly. But because of that, my grandma wound up being the person who could tolerate my stubbornness enough to teach me. And so this is one of her pins, and she had a quilt in her hallway that was she loved little enamel pins, and she had made just a simple patchwork quilt that was pretty neutral, and it was just full of cute little pins. So someday I have the pins that used to be on my apron at work, and this will someday come off of this project. It's sat here for years. Someday I'll make an enamel pin quilt because that'll be fun. Just kind of a fun memory there. Okay, so this is... So on this channel, here, I won't cover this up. It's, while I talk to you, you're going to see applique and embroidery, and as long as it is going to finish in quilt form, so like this it has the patchwork around it, and this one I would love to redo actually because I quilted it with a light colored thread and it drives me crazy. I think it's just one of those moments where it's what I had, and I wanted it on my wall, and I didn't, this one's over 10 years old. It's a Bare Roots Thanksgiving wall quilt, and I keep my patterns a lot in binders. That's why it's all opened up, and I won't flip it over because that shows the pattern. This one was fun to do and it goes surprisingly fast. They're just these little motifs, and so it stitches really, really quickly. I would say this border was the part where I was like, it's never going to end. And even that probably didn't take me as long as it seems to remind me of my memory. But that was really fun. Okay, so the next series of quilts are coming from this book, Jo Morton's Jo's Little Favorites. She also has a second book called Jo's Little Favorites 2, and it's fabulous. I thought I had it, but I didn't see it on my shelf, so it must be just something that I have put in a wish list multiple times, or I'm just aware of. Anyways, I've done almost everything out of this book, and I think I gathered pretty much all of them. Anyways, this is really fun because she does all of hers. I'll try to find a couple of them. She does all of hers in her fabrics, Jo Morton's, and it's 1800s reproductions. And I mean, I adore her fabric, but I like to play with color. So here is the first one I'm going to show you from the book, Night Flight. And it's gorgeous with the cheddars and the black, and it would be super good, you know, Halloween or October-y, November-y quilt. And these are kind of messy, but I saw it kind of like the Northern Lights was my thoughts with this. Again, it's the batiks, and sorry for the fuzzies on it. I have dogs, and I pulled some of these out of the wooden chest that they live in. Here's my backing, which I think was the inspiration palette for it. And I just thought, oh my goodness, it's like, I don't know, it just made me think of the Northern Lights. And so those were my colors. You don't have to be limited to what you see on the page. And I like to play with that a lot. So the next one, oh, it's not coming easily. Anyways, I'll just show them. These all come from the same book. And these are great little, especially the smaller ones, they're great on coffee tables or the center of a table. And I put them on shelves, and they'll have just like a little bit draped over, or you can tack them to a wall or put it, I mean, the more formal way would be to create a sleeve, but I don't always make sleeves for mine because I change where I put them every year when I pull them out. Like this one's pretty much a summer one that I pull out for summer because I loved this border print. It's an old Moda, but I kind of forced it into a July kind of feel with the American flags there. Yeah. I love this one. I actually put this one up a lot at Christmas, though it's a year-round one. I love how it turned out, the primitive berries, and it's cute. These were so fun to do. It makes me want to find another miniature quilt, but actually I have several. I don't need to find a book, but this is my favorite one from the book, and it's the closest to what her original looked like, but I swapped out, so it's not all reproductions. This is a Japanese taupe, and I loved the colors in this. I think it's a Hoffman, autumn leaf kind of thing, and so I just mixed in the reproductions with other ones. I love scrappy quilts. I do not typically stick to one line in a quilt. I think it's gorgeous when people do, and sometimes people do it, I'm like, oh my gosh, why don't I do that more? But somewhere along the line, I just fell in love with the freedom of scrappy quilts and just being able to, that's the creative process for me, because really following a pattern is following a pattern, but being able to tweak the colors and the energy of the project with different designs and motifs and whatever, and I don't know, I think that's the magic. Personalizes everything. Okay, so that's all my little projects. Now we'll jump into the bigger quilts. I'm just going to scoot these over here. Sorry, Grace. You're a good girl. Okay, perfect. So we'll move into the next ones. This big one is the oldest quilt I still have in my possession, and I don't have the pattern for it. I know it came out of a magazine, but I don't have any information on it. Ooh. Anyways, it's beautiful. There are a lot of little squares. And you can see they're not big. I think they finish around 1 inch. But it's old and soft from years of use. It's back when I did, so life as I get older gets faster and busier, and so I have to choose where I put my time. I used to do the traditional, and I actually prefer the traditional hand stitch binding with an invisible stitch, not the big stitches like you see nowadays. A lot of people do, and I actually have come to a place where I machine bind most of my quilts, unless I do a lot of handwork or it's special. I will probably choose to machine bind because it's much faster, and I do a lot of cross stitch and applique and embroidery, so I use my hands a lot, and I have concerns at this point of, those hand problems you can get in all their various forms. Anyways, so I am getting better at machine binding, and it's much faster. But there are still some quilts that deserve the hand binding and the time. This one is bigger, so I'll kind of rotate it so you can try to see as much as possible. Ooh. This one was really fun to do. There's 2 of each block. It's from the book Baker's Dozen, and I don't have the book anymore. I gave it to my sister when we started doing it. It has 12 different quilts, I want to say, projects, but they're based off of the same blocks. So you have this set of blocks, and then they've arranged them or finished them in different ways. So this one has the double Irish chain through it, and anyways, there's another one that Brain has, I want to say it's log cabins through the borders. It's a different layout. Anyways, she and I were doing that together as kind of a sisters sew along thing. And so when we started that, I just took pictures of the blocks I needed and gave her the book because she couldn't afford to buy the book at the time, and I had already done the blocks before, so I was more familiar with them. I didn't need extra information. Anyway, so I don't have the book anymore, but it is Better by the Dozen. I believe Better by the Dozen. And it's a fun book. There's some really cute things and very different finishes. Oh, here's my backing. And this is one of the few, most times I'll do an all-over quilting design just because it's simpler. I'm doing them on home machines. Like right now, I have a 350, so it doesn't have a lot of arm space. And but this one I did a grid to kind of tack everything down, and then I went back with all the pins still in place and did my own little motifs in each block, and that was kind of fun to experiment with. I was much braver in my 20s apparently than I am now with my quilting, which is ironic. I guess you're not afraid of it because you don't know to be afraid of it. It's something I've talked about with people before, that they'll say, oh, I'm a beginner, and I kind of jumped into one woman I talked to. She was doing Judy Niemeyer quilt. Her first quilt was a Judy Niemeyer, and it was spectacular. And she's like, yeah, it's one of those things where I didn't know what I was getting into, so I didn't know to be afraid of it. And now looking back, I'm like, what was I thinking? But it was absolutely spectacular. It was, oh my goodness, she did beautiful work. So maybe that's what my quilting was, is I didn't know that it could be more difficult than one way or another. And so I was just like, I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna try it. This is one of my favorite quilts. And it's larger, so I'll just show half of it because it's the same basic idea. It's my all-time favorite that I've made. And it is going on 15 years old now. I made it while my parents lived in Alaska, and I would spend my summers with them, and in my early 20s, and the state flower is the forget-me-not. And so I saw this fabric, and my mom had the collection of Better Homes and Gardens, their hardbound books. And I can show you the information here because I'm actually going to make a second one. Anyways, this is actually an adaptation of a feathered star. So a true feathered star has the point that comes clear out, and so it really becomes a star. This is called a pierre block, and that's where they cut off the tips of the stars. Other than that, it's basically a feathered star, but but it's actually it's based off of a 1930s quilt. Oh my gosh, I'm so shaky. I'm so sorry. And I fell in love with that, and when I saw this fabric, I was like, oh my gosh, it'd be so beautiful in that. But I had this vision of the kind of variegated points on the feathers on the star. And so yeah, that's what I did. And I made the entire top while I was visiting them. It was just, I just like did it. And the quilting on this one is quilting in the ditch. I echoed the stars. And I've actually quite liked that. Something about the simplicity of it just suits the quilts. There's enough going on that it didn't really need the elaborate flu-fla-flas of quilting. Okay, so I'm gonna set this one aside because we're gonna come back to it and get a little sip here. All right, I'll try to move a little faster. Sorry guys, I tend to get a little chatty. Okay, this one I don't have pattern information for. It was a free chart from the designer of the fabric, and I made it as a sample. And true confessions of a quilter, at the time I made it, I could appreciate how beautiful the fabric was, but I hated it. I was like, oh yeah, it's so beautiful, but this is not my style. I've come to quite like it. It's just very different from anything else I had made. And the mitered corners, I tend to do straight square borders. So doing that was a real good learning experience. And it is beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful fabric. I always loved the fabric. It's just very different. Anyways, so that's that. Try to move a little faster. This was a free Moda. At the time it was a pamphlet. And it's done all in Kansas trebles, and I actually machine applique it with a zigzag. It's like nothing fancy. Did this when I was and it's covered in fuzzies. Oh my gosh. I must have washed it with a towel or something. Anyways, I've liked this one for years. It's one of my older ones. I think it's actually older than some of the others I've shown, but yeah, it was fun. Fun to do. I would not zigzag applique. If I was going to do machine applique again, I would not use a zigzag stitch because it's very, kind of has a scratchy quality to it, and that, I don't know, that could have been the thread I was using. It might have been Coats and Clark or something, you know, in my range. This one has a bit of a story. My mom made this quilt when I was young, like elementary school. And so this was a quilt that had always been on, and she did much brighter colors, you know, 90s Halloween colors, think that. But she had done it, and it was always on our couch at Halloween time. And so, you know, we'd watch Hocus Pocus and snuggle under the quilt, and it was great. But she did, true to 90s quilting, she had done fusible applique and then buttonhole stitched around, or blanket stitched around her shapes. And when I decided to make my own version of it, there's no pattern for it. I don't know if there was originally or if it's something she designed, or I don't know where the pattern came from. But I decided I wanted mine to be needle turn applique because I preferred that finished look. And then I embellished my stars and I added faces to my ghosts because I'm extra. But it's super fun. So now this has been on, and I love the witch's hair. Something about like the swirly quirly of it just made me relate to my hair. Oh, and I don't know if you can see, but you know, Adventures in Quilting, I did a terrible but kind of funny little owl in the tree. Anyways, it was fun to do. It was really fun. And I love having my own version for my couch. So, really fun. And please ignore, oh my goodness. Yuck. Oh, we don't want to pull on that. All right. Let me get some scissors out. 1 second. Adventures in Filming. Coming to you live and raw, unedited. I like to do pieced backs. Occasionally I will splurge, especially on a bigger project, and get just buy the material I need for a backing. But I have a lot of fabric, and and it's far more cost effective to use scraps and do a panel through the back. And I really love, like, it's almost a quilt on a quilt kind of look. So you'll see, I'll show you as we go. We're about halfway through. I'll show you my backs because some of the backs are more fun than the front. This one is batik. And one of the reasons I was never drawn to batiks is because it comes off the bolt so stiff a lot of the time. And I'm here to attest to the fact that this has been in use for around a decade. It is so soft. It is just smooth, and it has this cool quality that like the printed cottons don't have. Oh my goodness, it's one of my favorite quilts. I want to do another one bigger for my bed in a different palette, though I love the purple fractures. Oh, it's so pretty. This is my backing, which is just gorgeous fabric. Anyways, batiks for the win again. This one is the Buggy Barn Crazy Quilt, and I omitted the borders. It's just the one skinny border, and then I bound it. And I added sashings. So I made it a little bit tweaked, but it's based off of the Crazy Quilt. Buggy Barn Crazies. So if you wanted something similar, there are a lot of crazy quilts out there. It's not a new design. It's not a fresh idea, but but it sure is pretty. And it's, like I said, it's funny how it has a coolness to it. Anyways, I'll get off that horse. Okay, so this is another embroidery one, and I'll show it back and then I'll come closer. Ah, hopefully you can see that. Anyway, so it's a monthly project. It's from Bare Roots, Little Houses, and they are they're monthly. They're so cute. This one was so much fun to do. And they come as individual patterns. And when I saw it done, they had just done out to this first layer of colored border, and they had bound it and they were hanging it on one of those little wire hangers with clips. Super cute way to display it. But when I saw them, I was like, oh my goodness, my vision is a quilt. So all I did was some math. And I added one extra border and then just put them together. And I love it. It's one of those ones that it doesn't come out every year, but it's a couch quilt. That's how my grandma had a couple of seasonal ones that she would have on her couch, and she'd just rotate how it was folded so that the current, trilogy of months was showing. And anyways, that one was really fun to do. I love this one. I've put it on the wall a few times because it does have the embroidery on it. I don't really want it to be... Okay, here's my side note. My philosophy on quilts is that unless you are creating it for the intent of display, quilts are meant to be used and loved and worn out, and that gives you space to make new ones. So I use my quilts, and when people come over, they get quilts on their blow-up mattress or on the couch, and when we watch movies, we use quilts, and I want them to be used and loved, and then it enables me, like I said, to make more quilts. But occasionally I have a quilt that, like this, had hours and hours of work before it ever became a quilt, and so I don't use this one as a lap quilt. It has only been for display. It's one of my few display-only quilts. And so I do some of that. And I have a couple in the works that will probably be more along those lines. But for the most part, if my quilts look tired, it's because they're loved. Okay, this one I made as a sample. Oh, falling over. And it is, I always butcher her name, unfortunately, Corey Durante. I think it's Corey Durante. I love her artwork. It is so whimsical, and I have bought panels that I've done nothing with just because they're sweet and charming, and they're all real funky sizes though. This is really big. She does some smaller ones. They're all just kind of based off of her artwork, but something cool that she does with her artwork is she'll throw, let's see if I can find a spot. See if I can find a spot of it. Just watch this one not have it. Oh, here. She throws old ledgers and stuff into her artwork, so she'll find old, handwriting and ledgers and things, and she'll incorporate that kind of in the backgrounds and as texture into her artwork. Anyways, it's super cute. I just like her as an artist, and then this was a really fun sample to make up, and it's been well loved at Halloween times. The backing is this green pumpkin, and it's all her fabric. This, because it was a sample, it was a line of fabric that came with the panels, and it all went together. I don't remember if the pattern was a free one. I feel like it was. A lot of her patterns that come associated with a panel will be free downloads on the, is it Clothworks, or I don't remember who produces her fabric, but through the fabric manufacturer's website, there will often, like Moda has a whole archive of free projects. Anthology has some really gorgeous ones. Anyway, so it's worth going on to the fabric websites because they give you a lot of free designs they're meant for a specific line. Obviously it's a promotional thing, but then there are also just some really cool patterns in their free downloads. So, okay, this next one has a little bit of a story. It started out in a magazine, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's cute. Yeah, okay. And then my grandmother had, I don't know what generation of embroidery machine she had. I mean, right now when she passed away, she had an 880, I think. So she always kept current with her embroidery machines through Bernina. But I loved these little moorhead bunnies. They're so sweet. And so I was like, okay, I can see, like, I have this vision with this quilt and these bunnies, and I made a pattern. And these are my beautiful bunnies. Anyways, it's just one of those moments where it all kind of came together. It was like this idea, and she's like, yeah, we can totally make that happen. And this is the result. And it is my favorite Easter quilt. It comes out, like, I need to figure out what Easter is, so because sometimes it comes out in March because Easter's right at the beginning, and I love it with these soft, almost Japanese taupes. Some of them are Japanese taupes, like this. No, that's an 1800s reproduction. That's a taupe, and that's a taupe. So it's just kind of a mix of, again, across multiple genres of fabric, but they all come together in this kind of cohesive vision, and I love it. They're so sweet. They're so cute as little Iris. It's so fun. I loved doing this one. This one was a totally different process for me because I did all of the embroideries with her machine, and that was an adventure. Like, we had a few that we had to toss because the tension wasn't right. We were getting puckering, and anyways, it was totally different, and I love it. It's one of my favorite quilts, and I love the backing. So pretty. So pretty. Okay, so there's my Easter quilt. There's no one pattern. I mean, technically this is my pattern, so it's just my own my own thing. Which is kind of fun. Little dabbles in designing here. All right, this is just a postage stamp quilt, Stash Buster, and it's done with, I actually found, so what I do, I'll do an episode where I talk about my organization and kind of how I calm the chaos. But I found the fabric information. This came off of a fat quarter stack, and it was Strawberry Fields Revisited by Fig Tree. And then it looks like I mixed in also some of the Avalon Fig Tree squares as well, with just a cream background. Ooh, it's so lovely. I have done a couple of postage stamp quilts, and they are just really fun to do. Here's my backing. See, here's one of those moments where I used the full width of the fabric, and I had enough, but I was short by just a few inches, so I threw another strip of something instead of having to buy a whole nother length of, 1.5 yards of fabric, or 2 yards of fabric almost. And this is one of my machine bound, so you can still get a really clean, nice finish, matched points on the machine, and it still looks pretty on the front because you stitch in the ditch. Yeah, I'm totally sold on machine binding for the most part. Okay, this is actually, this one has a story too. So this is Applique quilts. Ooh oh bloody, Applique quilts. And I'll show you my palette, and then I had, try not to show the pattern. See if I fold this funny. Okay, I enlarged it. So I took what is originally, I think it went up to around a full size-ish, and a small bed size quilt. And I wanted, at the time, so this is around 11 years ago, I was newly married and wanted a bed quilt. And so I pulled together fabrics that I loved. And it took me, with a couple of moves in there and just life being life, it took me a couple of years to get the top done. And when I got it done, I hated it. It was so sad. Like, I knew the colors worked and I was just so unhappy with it. Something about it didn't click. I don't know why. Have you ever had a quilt like that where you get it done and you're just like, okay, well, it's done, I guess. I even got the sashing going all the right ways, which is, you know, one of those, almost all the right ways. Famous last words. It's one of those fiddly little things that can make a big difference. Yeah, I've missed a couple spots, but I tried to pay more attention to it. Anyways, yeah, I got it done, and I was so disheartened by how it turned out. It just didn't vibe with me, so I put it away. I put it away for almost 10 years, and it was 2019, I think, is when I finished it. I usually write that down somewhere on my patterns. Maybe it was 2020. Somewhere in that range. I pulled it out again. I was like, I'm just gonna finish it. I had a big old chunk of 1800s. This almost looks like a laundry basket, but I'm not sure. And I mean, I had yards of it, and I was like, okay, all I'll have to do, and I had some extra blocks, so I worked out the math for the backing, which is really fun. Unfortunately, with a bed quilt, you don't see that very much, but it made it so I didn't have to buy any extra fabric. I was like, okay, I can finish this, and all I have to buy is thread to quilt it with. No big deal. $15 later, I am on my way. And I was like, even if I just quilt it and give it away, then at least it won't be haunting me anymore. Well, my friends, quilting is like the back stitching of quilting, of a project. And so I got brave and I did this, it's like a meandering feather, and it took me a week to quilt it because this is big. This is king size. I was doing it on my 350, which is insanity now that I think of it. But I just did one strip every morning before work, and it took me about an hour to do a strip of meandering feathers. And it's one of my favorite finishes ever. It's like, as soon as I got it quilted, it changed it. It just gave it softened. I think it was so boxy that I really had a hard time with that. And it softened that boxiness, and I was so proud of my quilting because it was something fancy. It wasn't just like wandering or stitching in the ditch. And yeah, this is one of my favorite finishes. I love it. I love it when it's on my bed. I'm very proud of it. Even though the design itself is very simple. There's nothing elaborate about the quilt itself, but isn't it funny how it just takes the right moment? Sometimes putting it away is totally okay because, and you might pull it out and still hate it, and that's a thing. It happens. I have passed along plenty of projects that I'm just never going to come back to. But, yeah, sometimes it all works out in the end. I love that one. We've used it consistently for the last 3 or 4 years, and I love it. I need to get another bed quilt, though, because, 3 or 4 years of it being on your bed almost exclusively wears it out. So I need an alternate quilt. There's one coming. This was in that patchwork place, no, Better Homes and Garden magazine, and I didn't pull it out. I'll try to find that information and tag it below if I can find it. Anyway, super fun to do. This one had a lot of steps. You had to keep things organized because there's these units and these units and then this unit, and you had to make sure they were twisted the right way, and it was fun. It was fun to puzzle that out. I really love this one, and I love the backing. It's a Philip Jacobs, I think, old. I had hoarded this for years, and I was finally like, okay, you can't just keep beautiful fabric in the closet. Beautiful fabric needs to be where you can see it. So do something with it, and this was the answer. Really fun. Comes out at Christmas. I've only had this one done. I think I did this one 2 years ago. I started it in 2017, but I think I actually got the top pieced and assembled and then quilted around 2 years ago, somewhere in the pandemic, as so many people did. I actually worked a lot during the pandemic because everybody was quilting, and so quilt shop was very busy, which is wonderful. But I mean, after the initial shutdown and scary period where we didn't know if we would be able to stay open, then it was like we could do curbside pickup, and that changed the game. It was so wonderful. It was, I mean, we really had the community, quilting community, come support us, and it was fabulous. But I didn't get as much quilting done. People were coming in and, oh, I finished 20 quilts this year. I'm like, oh wow, I think I quilted once in the last 6 months. That's when I got into cross stitch, though, because you could pick it up real quick and easy. And anyways, this one I did in 2019, 2018, somewhere in that range. And oh, it's so cool. It's the first time I did a pink background, and it's a very soft, it's a Moda Grunge ballet slipper background. And when I first got it done, I mean, I knew it worked, but I wasn't sure I loved the pink background because it's so pink, if that makes sense. I love pink, but I'm not like a pink person. I generally lean more into the blues and greens and purples of the color wheel, and peach. I love peach. Peach and tangerine, and like that's my happy corner of 5 colors. So pink was a stretch for me, but I adore K Facet fabric. And we got in this pattern, and both my coworker and I loved it, but it required a specialty ruler to be able to cut these diamonds. And so I was like, oh man, I don't want to buy a pattern and a ruler. Like at the time, money was tight. And so she's like, okay, well, how about you buy one, like either the pattern or the ruler, and I'll buy the other one, and then we can like share. And that was awesome. So I was like, okay, awesome. Well, I could do that. So, and I had a stash of cave. So I took it first and went home and did all the cutout, and then brought it back, and I was like, okay, here you go. It's yours now. So I don't actually have the pattern information. It's a snail trail with a twist kind of thing. So here's the snail trail block. But then it's got these beautiful diamonds, and so you get these secondary shapes. I mean, it's really a cool pattern. And I saw somebody do it with a white background, and it was just like, bam, it just popped. It was really cool. My backing is another K Facet Collective, and then this is a Tilda polka dot, which just, I mean, it just kind of had a whimsy to it, and it connected the front to the back. Anyways, I love this one. It usually sits on my chair, and I have to remember to rotate it so I don't wear out like 1 or 2 spots on it, but it's happy. It's kind of just fresh, and yeah, turned out really good. Love that one. I was on a cave facet kick, and so this one is from a magazine, Better Homes and Garden again, because I really like, I'm very particular about what magazines I spend money on, because I have enough books at this point that a lot of the things you see, or it's like, oh yeah, I've seen that, I've seen that, I've seen that, seen that, you know? boring. But every once in a while, they do something really cool, and they just do something really cool. So let me see if I can find what edition this was from, without showing anything. Fall Winter 2017. It's from the Quilt Sampler issue. And I wound up at one point with so many magazines that I cut my favorite things out of them and threw away the bulks, so I just have them in binders, which is why you see this little stapled set here. But I originally thought I would do it in red. I think it is gorgeous. So it's got, is it a grunge? It might be a grunge background, and then the cave facet for those squares, floating squares. Oh my gosh, it's so cool. I thought I was going to go red, but I couldn't find the right red background. Like it just didn't, nothing was clicking that we had on stock. And when you work at a quilt shop, you pretty much shop where you work. So I wound up going blue. And I love it. It was so satisfying to make. And this one went fast. This was a quick project because the pieces are so big that it just flew together. And I just did a meandering quilt on it with a variegated, I'll show you the variegated. It's really pretty. It matches the fabric with this navy grunge, and then the back is, oh. I love this one. I think it's time for this one to come out, right? March is green. Oh yeah, I like that. That one was really fun to do. Okay, so, oh yeah, here it is. My next one is my pineapple quilt, which I mentioned at the beginning with my runner. But this one is off of a blog. And let me see if I can show without showing. I guess, so here is the original. So pretty. I mean, it's so pretty and just classic and simple. And me being me, I was like, oh, let's complicate it. Because that's what I do with my quilts. So I made my own little diagram, and I made a rainbow of pineapples because rainbows are my jam. I love color, and it was so fun to do. But it took a little bit of time because to do it, I had to enlarge it to get all the colors I wanted in there. I made it bigger. So I think I added like an extra row this way and an extra row at the bottom, and it just changes all the math. So there's some figuring to do. Anyways, it's Pineapple Quilt by at Jackie Podesky Quilts. And here is that. So if you want that information, it looks like I finished my top in August of 2019. So this is what I usually do for my patterns. Like when I've done it, check mark, done, and then I'll write like when I finished the top at least. Because sometimes it takes a little time between finishing a top to get everything quilted. You know, you have to buy your backing and your batting and your thread, and then you have to find, for me, I have to find the energy to actually quilt the thing. Anyways, but this was a fun project. It was fun to do. It was fun to finish. It was fun to put on my bed or my couch or wherever I wanted it, and it's so happy. And it's going to be really impossible to show all of it at once. So I'll kind of manhandle it here. And I echoed, so you can see it went from red into the purple, pink, peach, orange, and then blue. Like there was intentional layout of the pineapples, and so I echoed that with my backing. It's a totally pieced backing. Just done with my scraps. Because like I said, at some point the batik aversion like snapped. And when it snapped, when I decided that I liked batiks, it was like everything had to be batik. I just wanted to buy batiks, collect batiks. Anyway, the back is really fun. Like you could just lay this out and that would be bright and happy and cute, but not as cute as pineapples. Really fun. And I found this fun batik polka dot. So one thing at this point, I have a lot of like your general basic batiks. And so now at this point when I buy batiks, I'm looking for unique designs, things that stand out. So like cool swirls, or like this was a stripe. I want different textures in my batiks, because that's one thing that deterred me from batiks at the first, is that it was all so blendy. It just became this like mush of gorgeous color, but like there just wasn't much going on with it. And so I hunt for interesting textures and designs, and that really helps. This one has little snails in it, and that really helps give it some interest. So that's my pineapple quilt. And we're almost there. I think I've got 3 more, and then we'll talk about what I'm working on right now, and then I'll let you guys go, because I know I'm a bit of a chatterbug. That's okay. You wouldn't be here if you didn't want to like see, right? Pretty sure. Okay, so my next 2 quilts, my last 2 quilts, my next 2 of the last 3 were both designed by a gal on Instagram, A Crafty Fox, and so a.crafty.fox. If you look her up in the search bar, she crops right up. And she designs really beautiful quilts with low volume backgrounds, which is what draws me in. They're typically 2-color quilts, which I've always loved 2 colors, but I'd never really done any 2 colors. And partly because it's kind of boring. Like you've got one color and another color. And being a scrappy quilter, I really like the diversity of fabrics. I find that as interesting as the assembly process itself. And so she did in, let's see, so this was last year, 2021, I came across the beginning stages of a sew along where she recommended a book, and so we read the book, and then we did this quilt along. And it was this Irish chain, which is, you know, it's an Irish chain. It's nothing complicated, but with the scrappy background, the low volume background, oh, it became magic to me, magic to my heart. And so I jumped on it, and I knew that I liked it once I pulled my palette from my scraps, because that's the other thing. I think I bought 3 or 4 quarter yards just to add a little, like this one was one I bought. Which other one? I think this is one I bought. I bought like 3 or 4. That one was one I bought. Quarter yards just to supplement what I had, but everything else came from scraps, which was awesome. It was awesome. Especially in 2021 where the supply chain was still kind of goobered up. I think it's still recovering in a lot of ways, but it's much better than it was then. Anyways, I made it bigger. That's what I was getting at. I had to buy a little bit more because I made it bigger because I wanted it to fit my bed. And it's not a full king size, but it's close. It covers the whole top of my mattress. And so It's so pretty. I love it. And then I did do a strip down the back. And it's this green grunge with the gold shimmer over it, which I wanted something. I struggled with my backing at first because it's so light and airy on the front that I really was I was hoping for something kind of like, you know, something like this or like that for my backing. Even the apples would have been just airy and cute, but like kind of complementing all the colors. And I just couldn't find anything. And so I chose this because palette-wise, it totally works. It was in the front. And, you know, luck of the Irish, it kind of has that gold at the end of the rainbow kind of feel to it. But I got it all done and I was like, it's really heavy. I don't know that I love it. It's totally grown on me. It's totally grown on me. And this panel is part of why. I just broke it up enough that it worked. Anyway, so I really like this one. This is my third most recent. So these last three I've done in the last 3 years. And they're my most recent finishes. Anyways, this was really fun to do. It was a well set up sew along, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that from start to finish. Yay. And the book was good too. So if you watch my floss tubes, I will recommend books just about every episode. I think it's going to be a trend that I continue through this year because I tried it a few times in last year's videos and everything was well received. So if people are still enjoying it, I'll still recommend books because I love to read. Anyways, the book that we read along with this will be mentioned in my first March video. This one was also an A Crafty Fox pattern, and her patterns are not currently available through her shop. So she ran into a bit of a copyright infringement. Not her, somebody infringed on her copyright. And it was really sad because I think she almost stopped designing at that point. You can totally empathize with her. So she found somebody was selling her patterns in a shop. She does not sell her patterns in a shop. She's always been strictly, she distributes her patterns. And anyways, it just really kind of killed her spark for about 6 months. And she finally came back and she's like, look, I'll sell them, but they're only going to come with kits. And so it's kind of hard. It's disappointing for the people who were, honest about purchasing her patterns and stuff, but I totally understand where she's coming from because if you can't, it's a breach of trust to have that happen and it'd be really hard to trust again. Anyways, so this was last year's sew along and I love her patterns. I do. I hate to say anything negative, but I want to be honest. This was a tough pattern and not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because there were a couple of chart errors. And so the whole mountain's coming off. Okay, we're gonna just prop that up on my legs here. So it all came down to basically this area. So square was the wrong size, which made it really difficult to get clean points without it floating a lot. And from what I could tell, it was not intended to float. Some patterns will have, it will float. The points won't completely connect and it's intentional. But this one, all of the close-up pictures I could see, it was intentional that would fit. I also ran into some fullness through these patches because there's a lot of little segments that are made individually and then they come together as one thing. Anyways, so I struggled with this pattern. I found it rather frustrating actually, and I almost didn't finish it. But I'm so glad that I persevered because the end result is one of my top 4 favorite quilts I've ever made. I'm gonna move this mountain before it falls over. Okay, there we go. Now I won't have an avalanche on my sleeping puppy over here. Anyway, so all that preamble to say is I still love her patterns. I still have a couple of them that I would like to make of hers, and I adore this finish. It's really beautiful. Hers was done, she did 2 colorways before doing the sew along. One was in kind of rusty cinnamon colors, gorgeous, and the other was in aquas. And my sister did this sew along as well, and she went the aqua route, which I was so tempted by because it's one of my favorite colors of all time. But I didn't have enough scraps in aqua, despite, maybe because I use it, maybe because despite it being one of my favorite colors, I just don't gravitate it towards it in quilting. I don't know. But I had a lot of blues and periwinkles, and so with the inspiration of this palette, I was like, oh, I'll just do a periwinkle blue purpley theme. And then it all came together. This one's so light, but it was a Rifle Paper Company, and I fussy cut that bunny, and I love it. It shows a lot better in person than it ever has in, in screen picture transfer. Anyways, this one was really, really fun to do. Well, okay, it was really frustrating at times. The result is really fun to do, really fun to have. And as with so many, pretty much all of my current quilts, I've got a pieced portion in the back, which is just all the backgrounds this time. I didn't throw any of the main colors because I put this gorgeous, gorgeous batik on the back. So, yeah, this one was fun. And I just did like a all over loopy quilting. And this one I quilted a little looser. I go through phases where I like really densely quilted things, or I like really soft, fluffy, loosely quilted. And last year was a loosely quilted phase.